The story begins almost 10 years ago when Shanice met a guy named Joe through a dating app. Joe looked cool in his pictures, and his profile caught Shanice's attention, so she swiped right. They matched, and Joe started talking to her. At first, Shanice didn't know much about him, but after chatting for a few days, they got along really well. Soon, Joe asked her to go on a date with him. Things moved quickly between them. In just a few weeks, they became a couple. But later, Shanice felt like everything happened too fast. Over time, she started noticing some bad things about Joe. He had a bad temper and drank too much. He often got mad and even started controlling Shanice. Joe didn't want her to go anywhere without him, and that made her feel trapped. It wasn't like how he seemed when they first met. At first, Joe seemed friendly and fun, but his behavior changed a lot. After 3 months, Shanice knew she couldn't stay in the relationship. She also found out that Joe had been talking to other women while they were together. When Shanice told Joe she wanted to break up, he got really angry. He shouted, said mean things, and called her names. Shanice was tired of fighting, so she walked away and decided to cut all contact with him. She unfriended him on Facebook and hoped they would never see each other again, since they lived far apart in the city. 6 months later, out of nowhere, Joe sent Shanice a simple hi in a text message. Shanice didn't reply at first, hoping he would stop. But then, he sent her a friend request on Facebook and kept messaging her. Shanice got curious, and after a few days, she decided to reply. Joe quickly asked how she was, but soon started asking to meet up. When Shanice said no, Joe got mad and started saying mean things again. Shanice blocked his number and all his social media accounts. A few days later, something shocking happened. Joe showed up at Shanice's apartment. It was the middle of the day, and Shanice wasn't expecting anyone, so she opened the door without thinking. There stood Joe, looking like he had been waiting for her. He still remembered where she lived from when they were together. Seeing him made her feel nervous, but she stayed calm and didn't let him inside. Joe said he just wanted to talk, but Shanice told him they could talk from the door. When she refused to meet up with him, Joe got really angry and started yelling at her. Shanice tried to close the door, but Joe stopped it with his hand and forced his way in. Feeling scared, Shanice ran to the back of the room and grabbed her phone. She told Joe she would call the police if he didn't leave. Hearing this, Joe finally stopped and, after shouting a few more mean things, left the apartment. At night, Shanice thought everything was finally over. But in the middle of the night, she woke up to strange noises. Still sleepy, she listened carefully and realized the sounds were coming from the window in her living room. Shanice lived on the first floor, and her window faced a quiet, hidden area. Her heart started pounding when she saw a man wearing a mask outside, trying to break in. Even though his face was covered, Shanice knew it was Joe. Hoping he didn't notice her, Shanice quietly backed away and went to her bedroom. She locked the door and quickly called the police. The police came fast and found Joe still trying to get into her apartment. They arrested him, and Shanice was able to get a restraining order to keep him away. Since that scary night, Shanice hasn't seen Joe again, and she hopes it stays that way forever. Next story starts with Baron, who has a strange and mysterious story about his ex-girlfriend, Megan. They met for the first time at work because they were in the same company. Baron thought Megan was nice, so he asked her out. After going on a few dates for a couple of months, they became boyfriend and girlfriend. At that time, both of them were in their early 20s. Baron lived with a roommate in an apartment, and Megan lived alone a few miles away. She often said she wasn't from that state and had moved there to start fresh, leaving her family behind. At first, their relationship seemed normal. They did fun things like watching movies, cooking meals together, and going out on dates. At that time, Baron was saving money to study for his master's degree, and Megan mentioned that she had attended college in another state before moving. Everything seemed fine until they had been dating for about 3 or 4 months. That's when Megan started acting differently. She became distant and stopped going to work. Since the company was big and they didn't always see each other every day, Barron didn't worry at first. But soon, he noticed that she was avoiding him. She would say she was too busy to meet, and even when they did meet, it wasn't as often as before. Something felt off. One day, out of nowhere, Megan quit her job. She told Barron she didn't like working there, and since Barron knew she wasn't happy with the job, he didn't think too much about it. But soon after that, Megan sent him a text saying she wanted to break up because she was moving to another place to go back to college. When Barron called to talk about it, she said she didn't want to have a long-distance relationship. Barron even offered to move with her, but she said no. Barron felt really sad, but deep down, he thought maybe it was for the best. Barron tried his best to move on. He thought they had ended things on good terms. But a few weeks later, something really strange happened. One day, after work, Barron walked to his car in the big parking lot at his job. As he got in, he noticed a woman sitting in a car far away. She looked a lot like Megan, but her hair was a different color and style. She was driving a car Barron didn't recognize. At first, he thought he was imagining things, but when their eyes met, the woman quickly put on sunglasses and drove away. Feeling confused and a little worried, Barron went home and tried to check Megan's social media that night. But everything was gone, like her Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat profiles had disappeared. When he tried calling her phone, it didn't work anymore. Barron asked a friend to help look for her online, but she was nowhere to be found. It was like Megan had vanished into thin air. A few days later, something even weirder happened. While driving home from work, Barron noticed a car behind him. A man was driving it, but he wore sunglasses, a dark sweatshirt, and a baseball cap, so it was hard to see his face. At first, Barron thought it was just a random car. But every time Barron turned, the car turned too. That's when he realized he was being followed. Barron tried to lose the car by taking random turns, but the car kept following him. Finally, Barron pulled over to see what the driver would do. The car stopped too, but then the driver suddenly drove past him, as if he didn't want to be caught. After that, the strange thing stopped. Barron never saw Megan again. Even though he tried searching for her online, there was no trace of her. To this day, Barron still doesn't know what really happened. It's a mystery he can't forget. Next, the story begins with Maggie when she was just starting high school about 10 years ago. Back then, social media was still a new thing, and Maggie was curious to explore it. She got her first smartphone and joined apps like Snapchat and Facebook. Soon, she started meeting new people online, most of them her age. One of them was a boy named Derek. Derek and Maggie started talking a lot, and before long, they called each other boyfriend and girlfriend, even though they had never met in real life. They were the same age, went to school in the same grade, and lived in the same state, but their cities were over an hour apart. Looking back, Maggie thought it was funny how quickly they became an online couple. They spent hours chatting and sending pictures on Snapchat, but they didn't really know much about each other. Their relationship only lasted a couple of weeks before they broke up. Maggie didn't even remember why they ended things, cause it just fizzled out. After that, they stopped talking and eventually deleted each other from social media. A year later, out of nowhere, Derek tried to connect with Maggie again. He sent her a friend request on Facebook and tried adding her on Snapchat. But Maggie wasn't interested, so she ignored both. Life went on, and she made new friends and stayed busy with high school. By the time she was in her 3rd year, Derek was just a faint memory. One day, everything changed suddenly. Maggie got a strange notification on Facebook. Derek was trying to say they were in a relationship. Maggie felt confused and weird about it, so she declined without saying anything to him. The very next day, as Maggie walked through the school hallways before class, she saw someone she didn't recognize at first. Then, the boy introduced himself, and it was Derek. Maggie was shocked. She asked why he was at her school. His answer made her nervous. He wanted her to leave school with him and go to his house. Maggie firmly said no, explaining she had to go to class. But Derek didn't give up. He started insisting and even grabbed her wrist. Maggie quickly pulled her hand away and hurried off, but Derek followed her all the way to her classroom. Luckily, he stopped at the door and didn't come inside. As soon as class began, the school went into lockdown. Maggie's heart raced. She realized it was probably because of Derek. Later, she found out he had been stopped by a hall monitor. Derek didn't want to answer any questions and even pushed one of the teachers. The school called the police, and Derek was caught. It turned out Derek had been expelled from his own school and was having lots of problems in his life. Why he came to Maggie's school after such a long time was a mystery. All Maggie knows is that she hasn't seen him again, and she hopes she never will. Back in the late 90s, Nick had a girlfriend for a short time, but their relationship didn't work out. They were too different from each other, and she decided to break up with him. Nick wasn't too upset about it because things hadn't been going well anyway. A month later, Nick found out that his ex-girlfriend had started dating someone new. He was a little surprised, but he didn't let it bother him and moved on. Nick lived by himself in a small house far from the city. One night, while he was sleeping, he suddenly woke up because of a loud noise. Someone was knocking hard on his front door. When he checked the clock, it was almost 2 a.m. Feeling tired and confused, Nick got out of bed and went to check who was at the door. But before he got there, the knocking stopped. Curious, Nick looked out the window. To his surprise, he saw his ex-girlfriend walking across his yard. She didn't seem to notice him watching her. Nick waited by the window for a little while, but when she didn't come back, he decided to go back to bed. The quiet night was suddenly broken by a loud, scary sound. It was the sound of glass breaking. Nick's heart raced as he realized it was coming from his living room. It sounded like someone was smashing his windows on purpose. Luckily, Nick had a phone in his bedroom, so he quickly called 911 for help. As he waited, the sound of breaking glass went on for about a minute. Then it stopped, and he heard someone shouting outside. The voice sounded like his ex-girlfriend's, but the words were hard to understand. Soon, everything went quiet again. Nick nervously walked into the living room. There was broken glass everywhere, and one of his windows was completely shattered. When the police arrived, his ex-girlfriend was already gone. Nick told them what happened, and the officers started looking for her. They found her walking down a nearby street. She was arrested and seemed really drunk after spending the night at a bar. A friend had been driving her home, but for some reason, she demanded to be dropped off at Nick's house instead. After banging on his door, she had grabbed a metal pipe from a neighbor's yard and used it to break his windows. Even now, Nick doesn't know why she did it. They had broken up a long time ago, and she was already seeing someone else. Nick got his window fixed and tried to move on, but he never forgot that night. It reminded him that sometimes people can act in very strange and unexpected ways. The story ends.